The Money Show.
Personal finance.
A lot of focus in recent days and weeks with respect to the cost of living and the price of everything going up. Everything from food to rents to interest rates, which affect the price of money, and the cost of your bond going up and up and up. And unless you're getting promoted every year, getting commensurate pay hikes, your salary is not keeping up with inflation. Therefore, you're getting poorer. And that's most of us. So how do you deal with that? Gugu Sidaki is at Wealth Creed, and our take-home salary is declining, Gugu. I mean, I think it's you can't have food inflation at 12%, electricity inflation at 18%, fuel price inflation at whatever percent fuel price inflation is going up, and expect the value of your salary to keep up with your outgoings. It's impossible.
It is impossible indeed. Hello, Bruce. Consumers, I think South Africans in general are really, really struggling. The simple fact is, as you've just stated, is that our salaries are not keeping up, and we cannot continue spending the way we are, and we cannot continue living the way we are. Something needs to change if our salaries are not keeping up, unfortunately.
So there are two ways of dealing with this. Either you figure out how to spend less, and many people who are only just surviving really probably do that already. They spend as little as possible. They get the pullouts from the newspapers, and they're comparing prices, and they're shopping around, and they are saving cents where they can and rand where they can, and buying up on the specials. It's all well and good for us to sit back and say, well, you just need to review your budget and maybe not go to Mauritius every year, but only every 2 years. Very few people, unfortunately, have to make that terribly hard life choice. So in the real world, which most of us occupy, when it comes down to reviewing the budget, how do we begin that process? Is it a process that begins with a cutting mindset, or is there another way of doing it?
I think there are a number of ways to skin the cat, but in practice, I'll be very honest with you. I think let's start with this: you can't budget your way out of poverty, right? And I think we're all clear on that. But there are a lot of things that we see in practice when it comes to budgeting and the process of budgeting that people don't do it properly, and this is a fact. In fact, I've got a case that I'm working on currently with a potential client who's frazzled about her personal finances, and she's not coping like many South Africans. So I asked her for a budget, and I also asked for 3 months bank statements, because we always have to do the work ourselves as well. We always have to compare what clients say they're doing with their money versus what's actually happening with their money. And I'll be honest with you, 9 times out of 10, we always find discrepancies between the two, between what clients say they do with their money and between and what they actually do. And with this particular individual, I think it was the discrepancy is big enough to make a difference to the bottom line every month, and that's the reality. So, if we're very honest with ourselves, we don't do the work in an effective way, in a way that will make a difference to us. When it comes to budgeting.
Okay. So here's a slightly more difficult question. I mean, do we lie to ourselves because we can't face up to the truth, or are we just bad at budgeting?
I think a bit of both. I think the reality is budgeting it's a mirror, and often people don't like to confront the ugly truths that are in their budgets, right? Because ultimately what a budget does, or your spending habits, ultimately what they do is it just highlight what's important to you. And for a lot of people, that's not a pretty picture. It doesn't necessarily reflect their values in its truest sense. So we think we are a particular person, and we'd like to believe that we spend or prioritize our money in a particular way, but we actually don't. And I think that's one of the difficulties, and that people lie to themselves more often than not, so that they don't have to confront the ugly truth. And then secondly, as you quite rightly said, I think for a lot of people, they don't know how to actually do it. They simply just don't know how to prioritize their expenses in a meaningful way.
And when it comes to the budgeting process, also people don't want to give up the good life. They want to somehow make the problem go away without having to compromise. And unfortunately, the budgeting process is one of compromise. It is one of acknowledging the problem. And the problem is the money is not keeping up with the expenditure. So either increase money in, and if you can't do that, then you've got to limit money out. It's not a complicated, sort of thing to get your head around. And that's fine accepting it. But when it comes down to the practical reality of doing it, but I'd love to play padel, and I need to have a cappuccino afterwards. And
Absolutely.
I need the best, is it a racket or a bat? Whatever it is. I can't rent it. I must own it because it's an investment in my health. We
Yes,
lie to ourselves. That's what we do. We
we
lie to
do.
ourselves like cheap
We do.
rugs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something I said to a client recently was, what are the things in your spending that you can live without, and what are the things that you absolutely have to have or have to keep doing? And the things that came out of that conversation were shocking because now I'm told nails are a must. Look, general grooming is important, but you don't have to do your nails at premium prices every month, right? We have to do our hair and we have to look a certain way, but you don't have to pay top dollar, and it doesn't have to be a specific amount every month that's going to break the bank. But for a lot of people, when you ask that question, things like that come up. I have to keep my Spotify, for example. I have to keep going to a specific restaurant at least once or twice a month because I work hard, and these are the kind of things that people say because I work hard and I need to spoil myself. And then when you look at what the money, the possibilities are with the money, there's a massive mismatch between the two. So yeah, we do lie to ourselves, and a lot of the time.
So how then do we face the prospect of expenses which are rising all the time? We have no control if we're not going to change our habits. We have no control over the increase in price that we face. Is there a way to negotiate expenses? Is there a way to navigate that in a smarter way rather than simply cutting? Because nobody wants to do that. So can we box smarter?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, I can speak for myself. There's a specific skin serum that I use. It costs a pretty penny. I know I need it for my skin, and the price point for me is obviously the issue. And I've shopped around, and I've actually found an equally good serum at half. I literally found it at half the price, and all it took for me was driving to a particular mall to go pick this thing up. And I've managed to save a good 300 rand. And this is on a continuous basis on one product. And I know that if I push myself to do the same with so many other products, I will find a cheaper alternative that's good quality without having to skimp on the quality. That'll sustain me for the medium to short while we're going through this difficult period in our economy. So yes, absolutely. I think we just have to be honest with ourselves, number one, and number two, we have to be willing to do the work. There's always a cheaper alternative. It may not necessarily be your first choice, but there's always a way out of spending top dollar for certain goods and services, and it's possible. I've done it. I do it myself, so I know it's possible.
The tough one is relocating. The tough one is saying, you know what, budgets are tight, times are tough. I like my lifestyle, but I'm paying 25,000 Rand in rent. If I moved to a smaller apartment in the same building, you don't have to do anything too dramatic, or in the same street or whatever it might be, I could actually be saving 5,000 Rand a month on rent, which then alleviates my cash flow problem. And I know I like to have dinner parties in this house, and my friends come around and they say, but isn't the view beautiful? And you feel terribly proud of your achievements because you're the one who's got the nicest apartment in the block. But that becomes a vanity game, doesn't it? And vanity is one of the greatest destroyers of long-term financial freedom.
Yeah. Is it Morgan Housel in The Psychology of Money who says the difference between your salary and your expenses is your ego, right?
Yep.
So
Just
we're all driven by we're all driven by ego. We all want to spend on the latest, flashiest, nicest gadget, and that's the truth. But yeah, I mean, I've got a potential client I'm talking to right now who's spending an exorbitant amount of money on accommodation, single, no children, no need to be living in that kind of poverty. But she lives there because she likes it. She could afford it at the time, and now we're having the discussion with her around the possibility or the potential to either move to a different suburb or to live in the same suburb, but as you quite rightly said, something smaller, because she definitely does not need the property that she's living in at the moment, and certainly she can't afford it. So these are tough decisions. These are decisions that are forcing us to confront our egos, but they're important if we're going to survive the next cycle of the next few interest rate hikes.
To my mind, the best solution is, yes, go through it's good to review our expenses all the time. Review the insurance policies, making sure that you're not paying for 5 funeral policies. Because, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, saying they came across a client that had 5 policies that all negated each other. And if if their beneficiaries tried to claim on them, they would end up in lawsuits because the insurance industry has ways of tracking these things. And they were spending money on insurance that they didn't need or would never be able to claim on. And so that was one part of tidying up that particular aspect of their lives. The other thing you could do is get a side hustle that's supplementing your income. Doing something that you enjoy, something that's not too much of a schlep, that you can do in your spare time, which then stops you from spending money because you're busy doing this thing that you like doing, that will contribute to your take-home pay ultimately. That to me makes a huge amount of sense if you've got a particular talent or skill that you can exploit.
Yeah, and look, that's possible, but not everyone is wired that way. And this is what I found. And this is a conversation I have with clients all the time around how can you increase your earning potential? And the reality is not everyone thinks that way, not everyone is wired that way. And to be quite honest, people haven't really explored that aspect of themselves. Having hobbies, number one, and number two, hobbies that pay, that could potentially pay you money to solve for your financial woes in the short to the medium term. But just back on the insurance, Bruce, it's such a common thing that we see where people are overinsured. I know a lot of single people with no dependents, no financial dependents, who have life cover, and unnecessarily high amounts of life cover that they don't need, that cost them a lot of money. And for a lot of people, and a lot of these clients that I've spoken to will say, I just took it out because, somebody said I should, and it just sounded like the right thing to do. And more often than not, when we review people's insurances, we find they're either over or underinsured, and very seldom are they adequately insured. So that exercise on its own is going to make a massive difference to the bottom line if we just take the time and to speak to the right professionals.
Getting and understanding the cost of debt, also pivotal. I mean, and Warren and I talk about this regularly, and sort of, you look at your cost of debt, and you've ended up with a short-term loan and a credit card because, you lost your job, or you quit your job at a fit of pique, and you decided that you would apply for another one where you were in the mood, and then you weren't in the mood, and then it was Christmas, and so you didn't apply because it was Easter next, and suddenly it was June, and you thought, oh, hell, I better get back in the jobs market. And then it was August, and finally somebody said, well, here's a job at 75% of your last wage, and you were so desperate you took it. That happens. It does. And you in that time, and again, it's the prioritizing what you pay off, when you pay off, and really understanding what it is, where your money is going, and that's the budgeting part. Actually, printing out your bank statements and analyzing them and saying, this is the money in, that's the money out, ouch, 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 and facing up to facts. And so many people, as with your first response this evening, so many people, the biggest barrier often is facing up to the facts.
For sure. And the reality is as you quite rightly said, a lot of people actually don't understand the cost of debt. They don't understand the effects of interest rates on debt. A lot of people don't understand when and why they need to take out debt, quite funny enough. And a lot of it is, all of that actually is traced back to a lack of financial information or financial literacy, because financial literacy is exactly that, understanding, what debt is, the effects of debt, and when to take out debt. Right, understanding the effects of interest rates on that debt. And for a lot of people, it's just a lot of murky waters. And I know so many people who tell you exactly that, who've got, the credit card, they've got the personal loan, they've got all different forms of credit, and not because they need it, but because they were offered it and they took it. Quite as simple as that. They took it up because somebody offered it to them. And then before you know it, they're sitting on hundreds of thousands worth of debt that they're now struggling to cope with. So it is important.
And that's the thing. I mean, you say to people, go and get some financial advice, and they go into their local bank and they go to somebody who's incentivized to sell them product. And this person says, do you know that you qualify for this? This isn't financial advice. This is salesmanship. And they end up getting sold more stuff that they don't need because they're being told that they are worthy and they can afford it and that they should do it. All of us, I don't care who you are, should be bouncing your financial ideas off somebody, no matter how good you think you are at this stuff. One, to remove some of the emotional choices that we make. And two, just to get another perspective, just to get some guidance, just to get a sanity check. For goodness sake. And to get, perhaps, and hopefully, if the person is any good at what they do, somebody to give you a little bit of tough love, to say, do you realize what it is that you are doing to yourself? Understand the consequences of what you're up to here. And that's so powerful and so valuable.
That's exactly it. And the misconception when it comes to financial advice is that it's only for a certain group of people. It's only for people in a certain income bracket, it's only for a certain race, and nothing could be further from the truth. All of us, as you quite rightly said, we need a second opinion. We need that accountability partner. We need somebody to crunch our numbers and to give us a proper smack, over the head to tell us, that we're spending too much or we've got too much debt. And quite often it's those conversations are really, really painful but necessary. I have not met a client that's walked away from our discussions and felt like it was a waste of time. You're going to, especially if you're speaking to a proper professional, there's so much information and there's so much knowledge and there's so much skill that can be provided to you by somebody who's qualified, somebody who's licensed. You could never do that on your own. It's like self-medicating. You can only do it to a point. Beyond a certain point, you need to speak to somebody who actually knows what they're doing and who can actually potentially save your life.
No, exactly right. And anybody who's ever been in debt, and we've spoken to so many people on this show, and I've spoken to so many people privately, just saying, I didn't realize how big the problem was. And suddenly the bills started coming in and I wasn't able to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And, people start, making phone calls and they tend to phone, late in the afternoon, just before supper time, just as you arrive home to your family. And suddenly there's somebody on the phone who you have to answer the phone, or they phone you on a Saturday morning to say, are you aware that, you could lose your home? And these discussions become incredibly stressful. So the first thing is to avoid those conversations in the first place. Don't get yourself into a position where you need to have those conversations. But even you do, you start to, and it's an emergency intervention, really. Isn't it? I mean, so often it's a case of really having an emergency intervention. If we're going to do three things, just give us 3 steps, Gugu, to take if we find ourselves that we are in trouble.
I know it's such a boring subject and everybody talks about it all the time and people are sick of hearing it. And quite honestly, I'm also tired of mentioning it. But budget properly. Print out statements for the last 3-4 months, take a couple of highlighters, take a pen, sit down at the dinner table and really go through every single cent that you're spending. You are going to be surprised at what you find. I guarantee it. I do this for a living all the time. I see it all the time. People are always surprised at what they find in their budgets, even the most meticulous of budgeted. So just sit down, take the time to fully understand where your money is going, and you're going to thank yourself for it in the long run. Number 2, I think it's important for us to be honest with ourselves. We spoke about it earlier. Serious look at your lifestyle and consider what the possibilities are with the salary that you're getting at the moment. There's so many things that all of us could do without, and that's a fact. There's so many things that we could cut, we could skip, and we need to remember that it's temporary. It's only for now. It's not forever. And the last one I think is really important, and it's something I've become extremely passionate about because of the effects of financial strain, and that's mental wellness while dealing with financial strain. I think all of us need to take care of how we feel and the psychological impacts of financial strain on us. A lot of people are dealing with insomnia. A lot of people are depressed, very anxious and having relationship difficulties, and a lot of it is because is financial, is money related. So if you feel like you're drowning, if you feel like you're struggling, both from a financial perspective or otherwise, seek help, and it's one of the best things that you can do for yourself.
I could not agree more. Thank you, Gugu Sidaki at Wealth Creed. Good, direct, unambiguous, solid guidance for you this evening. As your salary loses value each and every single month that goes by because your boss isn't going to pay you what's really happening in the economy either. You find ways to earn more money, you change jobs, you get a promotion, whatever it might be. Find ways to match your lifestyle, wishes, needs, and desires. Or find ways to cut. Ideally, you do both, by the way. You find ways to trim your expenses and you find ways to increase your income. And then you use that additional income to invest, not to party harder or have more fun, because you want to build up an emergency fund. You want to build up protection for yourself, because these tough times that we're in right now don't go away anytime soon. Bad news, I'm afraid.